You were talking about the last chapter and depending on nothing. This is where I got into the work of Camus, who wrote about Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill. And whenever he got near the top and almost had the task complete, he would lose his grip and the boulder would roll down the hill again and he'd have to walk down, get it, and start this bone crushing work all over again. And he was going to do that for eternity. He was cursed by the gods. He was cursed by the gods because he pulled a fast one. He was dead and had to cross the river Styx. But he told his wife, when I die, don't put the drachmas on my eyelids. The drachmas were put on the eyelids to close them. And then when he got to the other side, Sharon would be paid with the 2 drachma, and the corpse would be conveyed there to the underworld. Well, because the drachmas weren't there, when he got to the other side, he started this story. I shouldn't really be here. I'm only a pauper, and I wasn't really dead in the first place somehow. And it's a long story. It should be read. It's a beautiful myth in a lot of ways, but I won't go into it. But he tricked the gods and they cursed him. Now you've got this unending task. Well, that unending task is what we are all faced with as humans. Metaphorically, we wake up every morning. We don't really know what any of this is. We have to jump into our lives and start dealing with stuff. We have all kinds of ideas about it. And even though we may have this faith that it all means something, we never quite get there. You've almost got the non-duality boulder to the top of the hill, and then you meet Robert Saltzman. And that's tough. And the boulder runs down again to the bottom of the hill, because maybe Robert's right. Maybe this is just hypnotic religious belief like Christianity or Islam or any of these absurdities. They're totally absurd. The idea that there's some truth in any of these belief systems is just absurd on the face of it. And people don't like to hear that, because if Judaism is absurd, or Christianity or Islam is absurd, or Vedanta is absurd, then maybe all of my beliefs are absurd, because they're all based on this foundation of belief in a higher. There's something higher. See, there's always something higher. We don't know that. We have no way of knowing that. Someone like Chuck Hillig, he's a friend of mine. He's a great guy, and he's a very funny guy. But yeah. his approach to this I find entirely circular. It's a tautology, and it can't really indicate anything. He's funny, so he manages to sell this with jokes. And like, we're all camped out on the edges of the void. Well, yeah, what does that mean? Is there a void? From the human point of view, have you ever seen anything entirely void? I don't think anyone has. There's always something.
Right.
There's never nothing.
Right.
See, I know this is the nothing channel, nothing, but there's not really nothing. It's filled with content. If it were really nothing, the screen would be blank. And yes. It sounds funny, but that's the void. But we humans can't stand the void, not even for 1 second.
Yeah.
As soon as we have any even inkling that there's going to be a void, we fill it in quickly with something, a thought, a feeling, an emotion, a belief. That's just the way we are. And when I say I found myself awake, that's what I mean. I understood. I'm not making this. All this stuff is just arising, and I have no idea what it is, including myself. And so now, having realized that long ago, understood it, felt it deeply, when I hear people trying to discuss these ideas, as if they were facts, I can't buy it. And the scientists aren't talking about facts. They really aren't. They're talking about a point of view, probability. Yes, it's, for example, the electron, which is a basic particle in a certain way of seeing things, may have no existence at all. It's hard to actually put your finger on an electron. Or time, which we just take for granted. It was yesterday and now there'll be tomorrow. This may all just be one, say, tabletop, and we're like ants crawling around on the tabletop. If we could just get up a little bit off that surface and look down, we would see it's a whole table. But we're not able to do that. We're crawling around. We can only see what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is the next moment, not last year. Last year may be here right now. I've had many experiences, psychological experiences, where I seem to be able to predict the future. Many. I mean, but I can't prove it. There's no way to prove it unless you made a very perfect prediction in 3 years from now, a certain configuration of stuff will occur, and you write that down. Okay, the headline in the New York Times next week will be, and I write that down, and then that really happens. That would be a form of proof, but nobody can do that. So people just speculate on time, or energy, or forces, or material, or non-duality. So this is speculative. And the thing that I came to, Art, in being awake, and I know it's audacious to say I found myself awake, but it's undeniable. I mean, I just feel it, and other people around me have told me that. That's how I got into discussing this. I was silent about it for years. I didn't want to. I was doing other things. I found myself awake, and I realized that all of this stuff that people are talking about is nonsense. Every bit of it, all of it. All the spiritual books are filled with chit chat. Some of it's interesting. Some of it may actually relate to reality in some way, but probably not. Probably not. These are human ideas that we need to tell ourselves so we can keep pushing the boulder up the hill and not fall into despair. And that's where the suicidal notion comes in. Camus asked, why not just kill yourself? What's the point? This doesn't lead anywhere. You're going to die anyway. Why deal with this frustrating and painful life filled with suffering? What's the point? And he arrived at feeling there probably is no point. It's absurd, but that's the point. The point is to be able to live absurdity, to be able to enjoy walking down the hill again when the boulder runs down. At least I'm not carrying the boulder uphill anymore, and I'm having a nice walk downhill. This is a lot of fun. That's like when you're out in the bar with your friends having a drink or whatever it may be. But you do know that you have to go to work the next day, probably have a hangover too, and that's the boulder up the hill. See, and this just repeats, and it's like the Groundhog Day. We're all in it. See, Groundhog Day is Sisyphus. It's another telling of that story. The same thing keeps happening, and you just have to either check out or deal with it.
That if I may interject maybe on this for just a moment. There's a Velvet Underground song where Lou Reed sings, the song is called I'm Set Free, and during the chorus he repeats, I'm set free, and then he says, to find a new illusion. And so this sort of leads into the Sisyphus idea, and you claiming that you are awake, as you said, a bold claim for anyone to make. Are there levels to that? Do you find yourself caught in, oh, wow, that was another dream, and then you're awake? Are there levels of this awakening you have still experienced after this shift where you're where you were laughing on the kitchen floor, as you describe in your first book.
Yeah, well, awakening never ends. I
Right.
said that. I've said that. I think that's a title of it is. It's the title of a paper I wrote years ago.
Yes.
In fact, that's how John Troy got me on his radio show to begin with. He read this on the internet and invited me to be interviewed. That was my first interview. Awakening never ends. When I say I'm awake, I mean it in an entirely human way. I mean, as a human being with the mind that we humans have, this is awake, is you have not concluded on anything, and you never will conclude until you die. This will be the boulder pushing the rock up the hill. And the truly awake person enjoys the boulder, is not trying to get it to the top of the hill exactly, because he or she knows that that's not possible. You will never really know. You will never really have the answers to these deep questions. They're not available to us. Our minds did not evolve for knowing truth. They did not. And so they cannot know truth. What they can know is chit chat, and they can cling to it. And then what happens, I study cognitive science as a psychologist. Cognitively, what happens is these patterns of knowing anything, knowing what a word means, exist on a physical level in our brains. I mean, that can be pointed to. There's chemistry going on in structure. The more experiences we have with something like that, the more those metaphors build up. And then they blind us, because as soon as we hear a word or see an experience, see something visually or whatever it is, those things are triggered. And they're highly attractive to new information that tends to strengthen them. And they're highly resistant to information that would take away some of that structure. You don't like losing structure. You like to add to structure. On the cognitive level, this is the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when I'm presented with information that adds to these attractors in my brain, I accept it. But if the information tends to remove some of that structure and make me more blank, I tend to reject that. And you pointed out a few minutes ago, I didn't pick up on it, but now I'm reminded of it, of the insecurity that we all feel, and we want something to believe in. We want some way of being grounded. We all do. I do. I like to be grounded. I like to believe in things. The difference between the awake person, I'm not just speaking to myself, other awake people I know. The difference is that the awake person never takes it for granted. You don't take it seriously. You just say, this is the way I am. Art has different ideas, and maybe his ideas are better than mine. I don't know. See, that's awake. I don't know. I don't know what you know. You may know things that I can't even understand or imagine. And I may know things like that that you can't understand and imagine. Awake is seeing one's limitations. It's human limitation is part of awakeness. You don't imagine that anybody knows capital T truth. You understand that nobody can. Our brains did not evolve to understand truth. Now, just one more point. The non-dual buff will now say, well, Robert, you keep talking about the brain. You're a materialist. But the brain is not the source of all this. The brain is only receiving set. And there's a consciousness somewhere, God or whatever it is, higher level stuff, is sending these messages to you. The brain is just a receiving set. Really? And you believe that? Why? Why? You've heard it said. That's why. You've heard it said and you like it. You don't want it to be the brain. Why not? Because the brain dies. And then you will die. And everything that you think is myself and is important and all of that, it will die. But if you believe in non-duality, you don't die. Never.
Well,
and that, boy,
yeah.
that's what you call an attractive fantasy. where you don't, attractive fantasy is like, there's no death. Death is only an illusion. No, it's a beautiful fantasy. If only I could believe in it, I wouldn't have to speak this way.